Hi guys, welcome to our movie review. In this video we'll explain the movie Shaolin Wooden Men released in the year 1976. Little Mute, a bumbling orphan learning Shaolin Kung Fu, is the focus of the film. He struggles to keep up with the other pupils and fulfill the demanding duties given to him by his instructor because he is new to the Shaolin Monastery. The Shaolin Master gives his pupils the assignment to gather water from the river while wearing cumbersome iron shoes one day. The master explains that because they are heavy, they must concentrate all of their strength on their feet in order to move forward. This is essential to the Shaolin weightless technique, which would enable the students to fly like birds and walk on water. Little Mute's classmates challenge him to get to the monastery before them and let him take water from the stream first. He accepts the challenge, but they easily defeat him. Moreover, he falls down after tripping on the stairs. He sits by the river, depressed, and loses himself in thinking. Soon after, he begins to reflect about the brutal death of his late father by a masked robber. It transpires that the horrific incident scared the small Mute into quiet. As a nun who lives in the Lotus Nunnery presents herself as the Five Plums, a friend of the Shaolin Master, the child Mute is observed by the nun from a distance while she continues to watch him. She tries to inspire him by pointing out the lengthy history and extreme difficulty of mastering Shaolin Kung Fu. To even begin to scratch the surface requires tremendous patience and tenacity. He is moved by the woman's comments, and he chooses to complete his mission. Nevertheless, he comes in last, and the master reprimands him, calling him a slacker and ordering him to leave the monastery. As soon as he hears this, the little Mute apologizes to his owner and begs him to let him stay. He is eventually let to remain by the master, who then assigns him a penalty of chopping wood. Later, while splitting wood, he finds himself lost in thought once more and takes out a necklace that belonged to his late father. Suddenly a drunken monk shows up and little Mute gets back to chopping wood. The monk gives him a lecture about Shaolin before parting ways. Drunk out of his mind, he can barely walk straight. Worried little Mute follows him and the drunken monk inadvertently leads him to a secret cave behind a waterfall. There he finds a man imprisoned. The imprisoned man yells at two young monks who bring him food and water every day, ordering them to bring him wine. As soon as the monks leave, little Mute helps the man eat the food, instantly winning his trust. After finishing the meal, the man tells little Mute to bring him wine the next time he visits him. Later that evening, Young, the strongest fighter in the monastery, takes on 36 mechanical dummies known as Shaolin Wooden Men in a small hallway. When someone enters the hallway, the wooden men attack. It turns out that the person who triumphs over the men is free to leave the Shaolin. Little Mute and his friends enjoy watching the combat, but Young loses and suffers severe injuries. He is reprimanded by the master priest for thinking too highly of himself and warned that he will be punished after he heals from his wounds. Little Mute saves a bun from his lunch the following day for the prisoner. He borrows booze from the inebriated monks secretly as well. Naturally happy, the prisoner requests him to bring extra wine the following time. He also guarantees that when he is happy, he would gladly reward him. When the man asks him why the two monks didn't visit him today, Tiny Mute responds that everyone at the monastery was engrossed in the struggle between Young and the Wooden Men alley. The prisoner laughs at this because he considers it humorous that a guy might lose to a group of wooden figurines. He asserts that if it had been him, he would have disassembled the wooden soldiers. When the young Mute finds it difficult to accept, the prisoner reveals that he was imprisoned for using a novel technique known as the lion's roar. Once he succeeds, he'll be able to crumble any metal just by roaring. The prisoner then promises to teach little Mute how to fight the wooden men once he's pleased. The following day, little Mute again tries to steal wine from the drunken monk but ends up getting caught. The monk beats him up and teaches him a lesson. He also orders him to clean the kitchen every night as punishment. Later, little Mute spends the entire night cleaning. Impressed by his work, the drunken monk gives him a fruit and tells him that he doesn't need to clean the kitchen anymore. Following this, little Mute heads straight to the cave and gives the prisoner his fruit. Pleased, the prisoner says that they met each other because of fate. He then asks little Mute what he has learned during his time in the monastery. When the tiny Mute informs the prisoner that he cannot learn Kung Fu in the first 5 years of Shaolin, the prisoner advises the small Mute to disregard the foolish priest's laws and then offers to teach him Kung Fu. He clarifies that he will simply teach him a form of Kung Fu because he doesn't require an apprentice. Little Mute starts training secretly for the lion's roar right away, And one day the before-mentioned Shaolin nun witnesses him using these deadly methods. Little Mute appears to be pleading with her to conceal his secret as he kneels down before her. The nun goes on to explain that while what he has been practicing is Shaolin, it is quite violent. She says that martial arts are a way to keep fit and healthy, and he must think righteous thoughts because his state of mind will affect his situation. She tells him about a technique called the 8 snake steps, which she says is useful in killing. The nun offers to teach him the technique, which clashes with those of the prisoner's killing style. Little Mute eagerly accepts, though, and starts learning both approaches. Little Mute eventually becomes an expert at both tactics. As soon as the prisoner notices this, he or she exclaims with joy that the Little Mute is now prepared to pass the Wooden Men Alley test and leave the Shaolin. Before the Little Mute departs, the prisoner hands him a piece of paper that has been rolled into a ring and asks him to present it to the Evergreen Medicine Store's lane cashier. The challenge is won by the tiny Mute in the following scene when he successfully battles his way through the Wooden Men's Alley after a protracted struggle. Before leaving the Shaolin, Little Mute seeks the Master Priest's blessings. The latter asks him who's been teaching him Kung Fu since he's the first student who managed to beat the Wooden Men in years. The Master Priest eventually figures out that Little Mute somehow found his way to the Forbidden Cave and prays to God for forgiveness. He then asks if the prisoner gave him anything, but Little Mute doesn't respond. Before parting ways, the Master Priest reminds him that Kung Fu is to improve physical and mental health, and using it for evil purposes will cause death and disaster. To use it for righteous purposes will restore justice and save lives. The Master Priest also gives him a bamboo scroll and tells him to go to Windy Hill and ask for the Sublime Master. Following this, Little Mute heads to the Evergreen Medicine Shop and hands over the item to the cashier. When it is discovered to be a hidden message, the cashier gives it to the other members of the Green Dragon Gang. Little Silent begins residing at an inn in the interim. After he defeats some members of the Green Dragon Gang and saves the owner's daughter, Orchid. In another location, the prisoner perfects his lion's roar escape strategy. One night, the thugs from the Green Dragon Gang pursue Orchid once more before taking her hostage. Later, they want a ransom of 500 taels. Little Mute and the son of the innkeeper encounter the prisoner fighting the Shaolin monks alone as they travel to pay the ransom. Little Mute, who doesn't know the prisoner is the boss of the Green Dragon Gang, diverts the monks' attention and aids the prisoner in escaping. When they later discuss this with the prisoner, he makes a commitment to assist them. After that, the gang spends the night at a local's house, where the prisoner surprises Little Mute by murdering the homeowner's brother after mistaking him for a monk. After that, the prisoner drives the brother of the Orchid and the young Mute out of the house. When the two travel to the grave of the monarch to pay the ransom, no one appears to take the money. Unexpectedly, Orchid makes a surprise visit home as well. That evening, an elderly guy picks a fight with a young Mute. The stranger is skilled in martial arts, and Little Mute concludes that he is the one who murdered his father. In the next scene, Little Mute finally decides to take the bamboo scroll to the Sublime Master at the Windy Hill. When the priest reads the scroll, he learns that Little Mute is the prisoner's apprentice. As a result, the priest chastises Little Mute for following the wrong path, but nonetheless promises to reform him. After then, the priest begins telling the prisoner's story. He discloses that the prisoner who was previously regarded as stubborn was his student, and that he used to be the senior abbot of the Shaolin. Stubborn turned rogue one day and started the Green Dragon Gang. But he was quickly apprehended and detained. The head abbot decided to go blind, leave the Shaolin monastery, and live as a hermit because he felt responsible for the students' wrongdoings, and he appointed the present master priest to be the next abbot. He did, nevertheless, pledge to assist Shaolin in the future if necessary. Little Mute is soon joined by the master priest at the Windy Hill, where he informs that Stubborn has rejoined his gang and has begun pursuing vengeance against those who imprisoned him. He believes they could assault the Shaolin at any time. As he has now mastered the roar of the lion, he also conveys his worries that the monks lack the strength to contend with Stubborn. The ultimate martial arts system is handed over in the following scenario by a hermetic monk, and the young Mute learns it under the guidance of the current head abbot. When the escaped prisoner arrives to destroy Shaolin, Little Mute is ready to defend it against his former teacher. The murderer of the father of the Little Mute is also identified as Stubborn. Just then, the young Mute reveals that he is not actually mute but has vowed not to talk until he discovers who killed his father. Little Mute quickly gets into a fierce fight and uses his extensive knowledge of murdering methods to successfully defeat his opponent. Due to the Shaolin nun's teachings, which forbade killing one's adversary, he creates numerous openings but is unable to take use of them. Despite this, he fights hard and somehow succeeds. He offers to spare his former teacher as long as he stays with the Shaolin for the rest of his days. The escaped prisoner declares that he is beyond redemption but also expresses his happiness at how well his pupil has learned. Little Mute is about to be killed by Stubborn until he gets sidetracked. He tries to choke the young Mute by grabbing him from behind, but the victim gets out of the way, and the villain kills himself by cutting his own throat. The Green Dragon Gang retreats and gives up their objectives after losing its commander. Little Mute returns to the Shaolin Monastery where he is ordained as a monk as the movie comes to a close.